My name is Dr. Tony Cummings, candidate for Sheriff of Duval County. I'm a 44-year native of Jacksonville with a 25-year law enforcement background. I'm married to my lovely wife, Andrea Cummings, and I have two beautiful daughters, Kyra and Eleanor. I'm a graduate of Nova Southeastern University, where I hold a doctoral degree in organizational leadership with a minor in conflict resolution and a master's degree in organizational management. I was the 2012 Jacksonville Sheriff's Office 6 Pillars of Character Employee of the Year. I served as supervisor in the Army Military Police with a top secret clearance and also a tour of duty with the U.S. State Department. I also hold a state of Florida certification in education leadership across all levels. I threw my hat in the ring back in 2013 to become your sheriff after reading a 2012 report that showed Jacksonville as the murder capital of the state of Florida. In 2013, there was 115 murders in our city. And in 2014, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement showed a 4% increase in violent crime in just about every category in the first half of that year alone. We can do better than this, Jacksonville. And as your sheriff on March 24, 2015, I would like to partner with you to help beat back crime and safely secure our city.
What steps would you take to avoid a replay of Ferguson, Missouri in Jacksonville?
That's an excellent question. As I mentioned earlier, I've been in this race for 2 years, and I've spoken to a number of citizens across the First Coast, and the question always comes up, do you think a Ferguson, Missouri can happen here? And I tell them, yes, I do. And the reason I think it can happen here is because there's a gap of trust between the police and the citizens, some of the hardest hit areas in Jacksonville that are plagued by crime. What I'd like to do as your next sheriff is to increase the size of the Community Affairs Division to allow for positive outreach to those hardest hit areas. The private sector and public sector, be it faith-based communities, need to have a platform by which to launch their operations. We understand budget restraints, and the city is looking for ways to do more with less. But the Sheriff's Office is a recognizable brand that many of those nonprofits would like to partner with to actually have some sort of platform to launch their activities. So I'd like to provide that platform. Secondly, I'd like to increase minority recruitment amongst our officers. The Sheriff's Office should mirror the city of Jacksonville's population. As it stands, we need to have a more robust hiring process. The police department, or any police department across the nation, has to be mindful of high liability areas. That's your hiring, your training of officers, and your retention. Those are the areas that you will likely encounter lawsuits if something goes wrong, like excessive force. And we want to actually drive down excessive force complaints amongst our officers. So to increase that minority hiring is very important. I'd also like to increase the number of civil citations that are issued to the young children of these hardest hit areas for misdemeanor offenses, nonviolent misdemeanor offenses. In doing so, this will give the parents of those children a second opportunity to straighten out their children and get them right, on the right path. That's extremely important, and there are faith-based communities out there that are ready to assist in that process. As it stands, the city of Jacksonville issues about between 33 and 35% civil citations. The state of Florida's average in major metropolitan areas are about 72%. I'd like to get it between 70 and 75%. And finally, I think it would go a long way if we were to introduce public accountability and civilian review boards. For the first time in Jacksonville's history, the public will actually have a seat at the table when we're making these decisions on how to spend your tax dollars. And also, it will be helpful to note that many of the complaints that came out of Ferguson, Missouri were driven by that gap in the police and the citizens' trust. And those accountability boards will allow that trust to be regained amongst the population in Duval County. And I would like to see that happen as your sheriff.
What would you do to make illegal drug trade in Jacksonville really tough?
Well, first up, we got to do a better job of identifying these drug traffickers. We want to make sure we engage them and dismantle their operations as soon as possible. When we recognize that they're setting up in Duval County, we drive them out of here with our overt and covert operation. And you can do this by targeting their finances as well, because many of them operate with money laundering operations, and we have to have an aggressive approach towards dismantling those money laundering operations. Also, if you're going to get serious about the drug trade, you have to partner up with the prosecutors and make sure once we bring these people in, these drug traffickers, that we prosecute them vigorously. We let them know Duval County is not a hospitable place to do drugs or bring your drugs. Also, when these drug traffickers are incarcerated, we need to utilize our resources, our undercover resources, to try to recruit some of these folks and bring them into the fray as confidential informants to identify other possible operations within our jurisdiction that we may not be aware of. And we can do this aggressively because they have nothing but time in their hand once they're incarcerated, provided they want to cooperate with us. And lastly, we can't forget about those individuals that have a substance abuse problem. We must partner up with those entities that will provide help for those individuals and not necessarily incarcerate them for long lengths of time, because it doesn't serve anybody any good to have low-level drug offenders housed in the jail for long periods of time, wasting taxpayers' dollars and resources that could be placed elsewhere. So I think if we can target those areas, I think we'll do well in pushing back drugs in Duval County.
Terrorist training for local law enforcement coming from the federal government may be politically correct and not adequately train officers to identify and halt terrorist activities. What changes in law enforcement training would you make?
Well, I think right now we do have a pretty good training curriculum out of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to identify possible terrorist cells and operations, in our jurisdiction. But what I'd like to focus on is the human trafficking aspect of it and the cyber terrorism aspect of it. And the reason why I want to focus on the human trafficking, because I don't know if you read recently in published newspapers, a Scottish woman actually recruited 3 British teenagers to join ISIS. And their intent is to allow these terrorists to now blend in with us, because unfortunately most people think that all terrorists come from the Middle East and portions of Africa, and that's just not the case. They're actually, if the cells start from those locations, they're actually recruiting our children to take out these acts against us. And the children may have their own personal reasons for doing so. I'm sure it's not to join a jihad, but it makes for a dangerous situation. And if you recall the situation in Kenya, where 70 people were murdered, slaughtered in a mall, we don't want that to happen here in Duval County. So we need to make sure we train our officers better on the detection of these cells and their operations, how to identify these operations and not focus so much on the ethnic group. Because when you start to focus and zero in on ethnic groups, then you miss the bigger picture. They're terrorists that look just like me. They're black, and they will kill us just the same, us being Americans. So we need to make sure we don't, get a narrow tunnel vision and keep our broad scope when it comes to training. The cyber attacks. Right now, the Sheriff's Office, I would like to actually boost our infrastructure, computer infrastructure. If our systems go down, and we don't talk about this enough as citizens, the Sheriff's Office systems go down, their dispatch systems, their computer systems, we operate on a cell tower system. If that goes down, this city will be in chaos, serious chaos. So we have to train our officers and develop our backup operation to function reasonably without the use of those cell towers, because everything's on the computer now. And if they and that's what the terrorists are gravitating to, is to actually take down your computer systems so they can infiltrate your organization. No eyes, no ears, guess what? You're vulnerable. So I like to focus on those 2 areas: human trafficking and cyber terrorism.
Briefly describe what you propose that will provide additional protection for Jacksonville from acts of terrorism.
Well, what I would propose is just simply just training our officers well in detection, and having those officers train the citizens, especially those citizens that are living around our ports, our railways, our airports. They need to know how to identify possible terrorist cells and the setup of terrorist cells. Also want to train those officers, beat officers on the street in the early detection. And this is crucial, and we need to really focus some serious dollars on this training, because the citizens are in these areas, a lot of times they have information and they don't know how to get it to the right entity. And sometimes when they do get it to the right entity, being, let's say, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, for instance, who's handling that information, and are we doing it in an expedient fashion to make it useful, intelligence for those that can actually dismantle this cell? In other words, what are our lines of communication now? Right now, with much of the public not trusting the sheriff's office the way they should, especially some of the harder hit areas where the terrorists will gravitate and hide. They hide their operations inside some of those areas. Then launch their attack. We want to make sure we reach out to those communities and say, hey, you don't have to go that route. We're here. You can trust us. Okay, we're all in this together. So that's extremely important when it comes to driving down terrorism or acts of terrorism in our county.
What changes would you make to the sheriff's department, and why?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, those public accountability boards and civilian review boards, they're sorely missed in the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and long overdue. I want you to trust me as your next sheriff. But we have this thing from the military, we say all the time, trust but verify. You got to be at the table to verify that I'm doing the right thing with your tax dollars. And I would go on the limb and say 99% of the officers really go out there and try to do the right thing. About 2 to 3% of that pool, sometimes they don't get it right. And they don't get it right for various reasons. And you've read the newspaper where some of our officers have been incarcerated time and time again for some of the most heinous crimes. It makes you sad. But we can avoid these things by bringing the public to the table. And the public has access to our spending information. They have access to officer complaint information. They make suggestions on how to they have strategies that we might deploy in their neighborhoods to tackle a certain crime problem. And I'm not talking about SHADCO. I love SHADCO, the Sheriff's Office Advisory Council. They do a great job. You see something, say something, call it in. That's one thing. Sheriff Glover put that in place 20 years ago. We need to take it to a different level. The public needs to be in on the development of those strategies from the onset and follow all the way through to the conclusion. So if a situation like Ferguson arises, then guess what? We have a public panel, and their peers can tell them, hey, this is how the Sheriff's Office operates with openness and transparency. This is what you're asked for, and this is what we are actually receiving. It's not the sheriff saying it, it's not his deputy saying it, it's the public saying it. Okay, that makes sense? And when I would like to also take the administration and reduce the size of the administration. This is a key component of my plan to save you tax dollars. But every candidate in the race has proposed downsizing the administration. But I want to do it a little bit differently. We're going to cut some slots on the administration, but we're going to actually put a portion of those administrators on a midnight watch, a 24-hour cycle. And the importance of that is this. You want to be, as a sheriff, accountable from the start. We had a situation with, if I can mention the child's name, well, yes, I'll just say an 8-year-old that went missing and tragically murdered. That situation, many people would say that there was a communication gap that probably should not have occurred. Having been a missing person detective, I would agree that it should not have occurred. It's an 8-year-old child. You do whatever you have to do with whatever resources you have to bring that child back home safely. That didn't happen in this case. So with the midnight administration, the sheriff is plugged in immediately. He takes accountability immediately. He doesn't pass the buck. He doesn't say, I'm going to do an investigation to figure out who's responsible. He's responsible from the start. So I like to make sure I incorporate that. The third of middle management that's been woefully out of the fight for so long. needs to be put back into the fight. I'll give you an example. You're paying thousands of dollars for police cruisers, fully equipped with computers and officer equipment and shotguns and all the bells and whistles. But these vehicles are often parked at the substations. They're never in the neighborhoods. And how does that translate into wise use of your tax dollars if the vehicle is never present in the neighborhood where the crime is occurring? And the reason why the vehicle is never present in the neighborhood is because there's no barrier or cage inside the vehicle. And the officer, for whatever reason, will not go into those areas because they can't detain a prisoner. So what we like to do, instead of riding around on the taxpayers' free gas, we like to go ahead and put barriers back into those vehicles and put that third of middle management back into the equation and drive down crime in those neighborhoods. Put them where they need to be. We call it getting back to the basis. And finally, I like to make sure that our specialized units are given a new mission. The problem we have right now, we're seeing in the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office is much of our manpower, they're older and they're about to retire. Many of them looking forward to retirement, and as they should. However, our city is experiencing some serious times right now, violent crime. Crime may be lower across the board nationwide, but we're not feeling it here, and that's a problem. So I would like to get those specialized units back into the equation, get those guys out of their comfort zone, let them know, hey, I understand we have a pension issue, but let's not let the pension issue be an excuse for not doing your job well for the citizens. And I often tell folks this, that the U.S. military does a great job protecting us abroad, and from terrorist attacks. And they are some of the poorest paid people in the federal government roles. Their families are on welfare, many of them, and they receive food stamps, but they don't complain about doing their jobs, and neither should the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. So that's my approach as the sheriff, and then the sheriff takes on that mindset. It will trickle down through the ranks, and then you have a better police force as a result.
Would you enforce legislation or executive order to limit the Second Amendment or change existing procedures, and why?
I would not. I am a huge proponent of the Second Amendment. Your right to bear arms. And I understand both sides of the argument. We don't want another Sandy Hook, Columbine, but yet still we certainly don't want a situation that arose in Kenya with the shooting of the mall. So both sides have valid arguments, but yet and still the framers of the Constitution put the Second Amendment there for a reason. And I support your right to bear arms, and I don't have any intentions of changing that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Do you have a closing remark?
Yeah. On March 24th, 2015, I would like to become your next elected sheriff, and with your support, we can make Jacksonville a better and safer community together. Please visit www.TonyCummingsforSheriff.com. Thank you.